Mister The Prequels presents The Prequels. And yeah, let me do that again. Mister The Prequels presents The Prequels. And we are again talking about the very same subject, the topic that we've had on our plate, the front burner, as everyone wants to know, what do you think of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, 25 years later? Well, I loved it, and to tell you the truth, everyone in the theater loved it. I do believe it's better after 25 years, and not only because, well, you know, everyone knows there has been no awakening, and no, we're not going to leave it at that. I'm not just going to leave it at that. We all know there's been no awakening. I know it, and you know it. And now everyone knows it. There has literally been no awakening. And so, if your contention is that Star Wars was better, let's say, after George Lucas, well, then great, that's your opinion. But that's not my opinion. But another opinion is that George Lucas is one of the greatest directors of all time, and one of his greatest pieces of art, a masterpiece, is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Yes, written and directed by George Lucas. Producer Rick McCallum. Executive producer George Lucas. Turmoil has engulfed the Galactic Republic. And of course, this is due to a dispute over around the subject of taxation of outlying star systems. And then, of course, we meet the greedy Trade Federation, as right off the bat we're told about this group of people. And these are the ones that we're told are the bad guys in the movie. You don't need to have a rocket science degree, and you don't need to go to film school for 25 years or 1 year or 3 days to see this. Anyone who's old enough to read, or anyone who's old enough to understand reading as it's read to them, will be able to tell you this. It's not confusing. There is nothing difficult to follow in The Phantom Menace. Not even for a child, especially for a child. And you would say, some would argue, well, it's not really a kid's movie for all these politics. Well, let me say this about that. Politics is the world in which we live. And so to say that kids don't understand politics, that's like saying the kids don't understand sugared cereal. Well, at least the kids in America that I know of, that I grew up with. It's part of the life that we live, and George made it a part of this world. Politics. And it's Politics 101. War and Peace. It's an epic telling of an epic tale, of an epic story. One of the oldest and most time-honored, as we see this throughout history, of this kind of a story, of heroes arriving at their moment in history, where history and fate bring various characters together, some in real life scenarios and others in a mythological telling, as we see in Star Wars. And make no mistake about it, this is the creation of and the intellectual child of and the children of George Lucas. And if you want to know what George Lucas really thinks, just go ahead and watch that interview where George Lucas is being interviewed by Charlie Rose. And you'll see what George Lucas really thinks, and also what a lot of us think. But the creator said it, and we'll leave it at that. And now let's get on the subject of character development in this particular installment of the Star Wars saga. And that is this, the complete saga, episodes 1 through 6. And this is including the specialized editions and all the changes made and finally approved by the creator, George Lucas. Which, I might add, I might not approve of, neither ever wanted, but some of it I love. And all of it I accept and receive as the creator's wish. And I thank the creator for it. Thank the maker, I say. And I do give all the praise and thanks to George Lucas. And I'm sure that George Lucas would give all the pranks, or rather, Freudian slip, would give all the thanks and praise to those that influenced him to make this movie and brought him to this point in his life where he is legendary as a man, a creator, an artist, and also a fine American, I might add, an upstanding citizen of the world. An upstanding and fine citizen of the world that is a white man, I might add. He's a credit to his race, as Watto might put it, or as many of our audience fans might put it out there. He's a credit to his race. I wouldn't put it that way, but I'm just quoting various other people. He is white, and I'll leave it at that. So, anytime you're dealing with George Lucas, you're dealing with all kinds of matters that involve politics, discussions on race, personalities interplaying in these worlds, in this world that we live in, where sometimes people can be influenced by a charismatic figure and promising, making promises, and then sometimes because of a crisis or a perceived threat, out of fear and also a desire for peace and security for the good of all, and especially for ourselves and our families and our friends. And then, of course, all of the people that we hold dear, as we would put that in terms of how we were raised to think and operate in terms of a nation or a church or a movie, a type of movie group that you like, or what geek group you belong to, whether you're a geek or not, or if you go to some comic book stores, they will, if you're into certain kinds of cosplay, they will show you the door immediately, or Magic the Gathering, or whatever it is. I don't know, I don't play those games. However, if you go into some of these stores, if you don't fit the mold of what they're looking for, you're out of there. As I heard one guy said, or I heard of one guy that said, comic book store owner out here, and he said, somebody came in and asked him, do you have any Magic the Gathering or something like that? And he said, no. And they said, well, we came in here just looking for those cards. And he said, oh, well, there's nothing for you here. You can leave. I mean, you know, now that we're on that point, type of a philosophy, that's how many of us feel about the direction that as George would call them, well, I'm not even going to say what George said. We're just going to leave it at that. If you want to know what George said about it, you go and you watch the interview, George Lucas into Charlie Rose, or Charlie Rose interviews George Lucas, and you'll see what the creator really thinks, and what many of us really think. And we'll just leave it at that, and let's move on. So let's talk a little bit about character development here, starting with, of course, Jar Jar Binks. And Jar Jar is the key to this whole thing. And you look at Jar Jar and you say, man, this is one of the most annoying characters, and he keeps on jarring me with his annoying behavior. And of course, that's the way the character was written. And of course, that's the reason he's named Jar Jar. This is all recorded. The creator said it. Everyone knows it. It's no secret. The creator has stated it. The creator said it's going to be great. And then, of course, Steven said it's going to be great. And then the creator said it's going to be great. And then Steven said it's going to be great. And then the creator said it's going to be great. And it was great. And people that saw it loved it in the theaters when I first saw Star Wars Episode 1 of Phantom Menace in 1999 when it was first released. I had seen Star Wars originally. My first encounter with Star Wars was in 1977. And when I first encountered Star Wars in 1977, I'd never seen anything like it. Nobody had. I grew up with Flash Gordon and all that stuff. The closest I think I might have had to Star Wars was possibly Jason of Star Command, maybe. I don't know which came first, but Star Trek for sure. Something like that, outer space. But nothing as fantastic as Star Wars, and I'm talking laser swords. Come on, man. Hey, we all know what Star Wars was based on. Anybody ever read a book called Dune? And this is one of the great mysteries. Where did George get all of his ideas? Well, we know for sure he got a lot of his ideas from Dune. It's obvious. Just look at it. Ben Kenobi, old Ben lives beyond the Dune Sea. Laser swords, come on, man. Spice miners, disputes over trade disputes, right? Taxation over outlying star systems. Come on, man. This is straight out of every Republic serial, early 1940s, 50s Westerns, straight out of a 1950s John Wayne aerial dogfight scenes, or whatever those were. A lot of good ones when I was a kid. I used to watch the reruns, and George Lucas grew up watching these in theaters. So we all know where he got the ideas for these movies, and then it was filtered through the personality of the maker, the creator, the artist. And we all know George is a total weirdo. Hey, look, man, it takes one to know one. I, myself, am a total weirdo. It takes one to know one. And we'll leave it at that. But all this was filtered through the creator, and this is how the creator brought to us this creation, Star Wars. And then, of course, he sold it to the, well, you know what he said. You can go look it up for yourself. And I'll leave it at that. But George, the creator, has given unto us this creation. And as for character development, a lot of people didn't like Jar Jar, but take a look. He's one of the most iconically characterized as well as acted out characters in the history of movies, let alone the history of Star Wars. Come on, man. Ahmed Best deserves an Oscar for this role he portrayed as Jar Jar Binks in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Written and directed by George Lucas, producer Rick McCallum, executive producer George Lucas, an all-time epic masterpiece. 10 out of 10, baby. Yeah, and Jake Lloyd deserves an Oscar for his portrayal of Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Written and directed by George Lucas. Yeah. Producer Rick McCallum. Look, man, I'm going to go over this again. I'm going to say it again. Anybody that's interested in asking or answering the question, is George Lucas a good director? Just take a look at Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Yeah, look at the character development. Jar Jar Binks starts out, you think he's a klutz in many ways, clumsy, he admits it. We are introduced to this character as totally annoying and in the way. Never seen a character like this. He's totally funny. He's designed to be funny. Nobody wanted to see a character like this. Nobody ever requested this kind of a character. But if you think about it in terms of what George wanted, well, then you're going to see George wanted this kind of a character. And we got this kind of a character. So, if you didn't want this kind of a character, then great. That's your opinion. You didn't want it. You didn't like it. George wanted this character. George created this character, and he wrote this character. Every line, every beat, every eye blink, mouth movement, George Lucas put that in there on purpose with Jar Jar Binks. You watch the videos, you look at the tapes, you'll see George Lucas giving Ahmed Best direction on how to act, how to walk. Don't tell me that George Lucas is a bad director, or he's lazy, or he lost his touch, or, look, man, I'm just going to call it like it is. Stupid observations such as, Well, you may not have noticed it, but your brain did. Come on, man. I know it. You know it. You're getting clicks. It's funny. But let me tell you something else your brain noticed. That these movies are freaking awesome, man. Man, look it. Say what you will about any movie that you've ever seen that you loved that was a perfect movie according to your standards. Now, according to my standards, there are a couple of these. One of the most perfect movies ever made, The Rocketeer. The Rocketeer, yes. And directed by Joe Johnston. And music by James Horner. And this movie is a perfect movie in every way. It's how, if I was going to teach a class on how to write a movie, how to do it perfectly, and carry it out perfectly, including editing, I wouldn't have changed anything on this movie. It's perfect. It's one of the most perfect movies ever made. I would say The Rocketeer. Directed by, and I don't remember who wrote this movie, but it's a movie that totally captures, it's a Joe Johnston movie. It's directed by. And Joe Johnston does these kind of movies that are, they're able to be fantastical. They're very much in the line, I think, of the George Lucas Star Wars style. And so, some digression there, but the point is, George Lucas wanted these movies a certain way. And his take on these characters is what he wanted to see. I loved it. I loved them. I loved everything about the Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. When I had it on VHS, I watched it every day, possibly 2 times a day for a year straight. And so did my kids. I raised my kids on it, and they love Star Wars, and they love The Phantom Menace, and everybody I know personally loves Jar Jar Binks, even though some of them don't really necessarily like him. I guess they don't love him. Well, I love him. And as far as I'm concerned, Jar Jar Binks is the key. And George Lucas is a great director. And I say, thank the maker. And dear friends, that's all the time we have for today. Remember, your focus determines your reality. And may the Force be with us.